I want to welcome everyone to the Bechtel Conference Center for this important conversation about the Great Recession and recovery in California. I'm Gary Hart. I'm the chair of the PPIC Board of Directors. We're delighted by the turnout today. Glad all of you are able to join us, and think we have an interesting program for you. This event is the first in the Sutton Family Speaker Series, and we are delighted to have Tom and Marilyn Sutton, who are the beneficiaries of this event, to be with us today. Tom and Marilyn, thank you so much. And this generous gift to PPIC supports this series about promising innovations in public policy here in California. Before we get underway, I'd like everyone, of course, to turn off your cell phones and other electronic devices. It'd be much appreciated. And we want to get right into the program. While you continue to enjoy your lunch, PPIC Policy Fellow Sarah Bohn will begin today's program with an overview of her just published report, just published last week by PPIC, entitled The Great Recession and Distribution of Income in California. And at the conclusion of the lunch program, we're all going to move to the adjacent forum to continue the conversation. Just a word or two more about Sarah. She is a research fellow who joined PPIC in 2007. Her research interest spans a range of topics, including income trends, workforce training, and immigrants in the labor market. She holds a PhD in economics from the University of Maryland College Hart. So we look forward to her presentation. Sarah, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Gary. And I wanted to add my thanks as well to Tom and Marilyn Sutton for providing the opportunity to have this important conversation. The Great Recession officially ended in June 2009 based on the National Bureau of Economic Researchers tracking of broad economic trends. That means that the last year and a half has been a recovery. But I think it's fair to say that most families haven't seen this last year and a half as a recovery at all. Certainly not the average Californian. The unemployment rate in California remains stubbornly high at over 11% in October of this year, almost 12% actually. And as I'll talk about more in a minute, we have not seen a rebound in family incomes, at least through 2010. These continued struggles are reflected in the broad dialogue that's developed in the American public right now. President Obama, in recent speeches, has likened the current challenges to make or break time for the middle class. And many have taken up the slogan of the 99% versus the 1%, as I think a way of encapsulating the growing divide between rich and poor. The reality is that the Great Recession did not cause these extremes that we're at today. There have been fundamental long-term transitions in our economy and society driving these trends in income for decades. The Great Recession simply amplified where we're at on those trends, and I think raised the issues back into the public consciousness. So this presents an opportunity for a public conversation where we can decide as a state or a nation what to do, if anything, to address these disparities that we see. So what do we know about how families are doing from the cold, hard data? I'll be discussing the high points of the report, which you have on your chair. Hopefully you're not sitting on it, but it should be at your table. It was published, as Gary mentioned, last week by PPIC and is co-authored by myself and Eric Schiff, who's also here. I'm going to try to hit the main points, and I'm happy to go into more detail later. We should have a few minutes for question and discussion at the end of my short talk. So we were interested in taking a look at how California's families were faring in terms of economic well-being. Well, in terms of one measure of their economic well-being, their income. We wanted to know what was happening during the Great Recession for California's families and how that fit into the long-term context of the growing measure of inequality that we knew was already in progress. Yes, we already knew about the 99% and 1% well before the Occupy movement. what we find overall is that the Great Recession impacted families across the income spectrum, from low-income families, middle-income, and high-income families as well. But low-income families saw the steepest losses during the Great Recession. The lowest level that we can measure is the 10th percentile, and this represents a family who's doing, in terms of their income, only better than 10% of California's families. At that low level of income, families actually saw over a 21% decline during the Great Recession. And that brought them to a level of about $15,000, the equivalent for a family of 4. This represents actually 24% lower level of income than this 10th percentile family was doing in 1980. So a strong trend over time of the low-income families in our state doing progressively worse. At the middle of the distribution, in fact, at the middle of the income spectrum, the median, we find that families also experienced declines during the recession. During the official years, from 2007 through 2009, the median family income in our state fell about 5%. And in the year of recovery through 2010, median family income fell another 5%, bringing that level of income to about $61,000 for a family of 4. And this is only as well as the median family was doing in 1980. At the upper end of the income spectrum, high-income families saw declines as well, but by a much smaller rate. So at the 90th percentile, income fell about 5% in total. But despite that decline over a few years, they actually are doing much better than the 90th percentile in 1980, a strong trend of improvement in high incomes in the state. So these recent trends have brought us to new extremes. In particular, the gap between high and low incomes is at a 30-year high. In 1980, the gap between high and low incomes in California was about 6-to-1, meaning that high-income families earned 6 times more than low-income families. And back then, I hear people were concerned about the extreme level of inequality. But now we were at double that rate. So high-income families in 2010 in California were earning about 12 times more than low-income families, double. To complement this look at the extreme in income distribution, we also took a look at what was happening in the middle of the income range. And once we defined a consistent way to measure what middle income meant over time, we find that by 2010, actually less than a majority of California's families fall into middle income range. And we define that as income levels between about $44,000 and $155,000. We are at a 30-year low at about 49.7% as of 2010. As one headline this weekend read, we are the 49.7%. That was one of my favorites. So how did the Great Recession bring these new extremes in income? As you know, as I mentioned earlier, unemployment is stubbornly high. We've had the highest rates during the Great Recession, at least since the 1970s. In addition, for those unemployed Californians, they're spending more time looking for work now than ever since we've been measuring this data all the way back to 1948. In the state, the average unemployed worker in 2010 was out of work for over 37 weeks. In the report, we find that it's not just unemployment driving declines in family income, but also underemployment. So families at the end of the day saw lower levels of income because workers tended to be working fewer hours or working part-time instead of full-time. They did not see a decline in their wages. It's really underemployment that was the other key hallmark of this recession. These are the short-run realities of the Great Recession: declines in income across the board, and even for working families. In California, it's a bit worse than it's been in the rest of the country. Our unemployment rate is higher, about 3 percentage points higher right now. The gap between high and low incomes, the measure of income inequality, is greater in California than in the rest of the US, mostly because our high incomes are higher and our low incomes are lower. Furthermore, we see a smaller share of families in the middle income range in our state as compared to the rest of the US. Even though back three decades ago in 1980, we were at about par between California and the rest of the country. Our decline has been steeper. When the recovery picks up, we're likely to see some improvement in these measures of income distribution. And we've already seen some signs of improvement in labor market opportunities. The unemployment rate is down 1 percentage point from a year ago. Not much, but at least it's not going up. And our report shows that by 2010, there are some turnaround in the underemployment measures. So the rate of full-time work seems to be turning around a bit for workers in California. But many estimate that it will be through at least 2015 until we close the jobs gap and return to the level of employment that we were at before the recession hit. What can we do to speed the recovery? Our report suggests that due to underemployment, policies that promote getting workers back to full-time work are likely to be more effective than those that target wages. In addition, of course, policies to spur job creation can address the jobs gap that we're currently in. But unfortunately, many of the job creation levers are federal policy levers, not state ones. So in general, promoting economic growth is likely to be an effective strategy for the state to address the immediate concerns of the recession. Once the recovery picks up fully, what can we expect? Based on previous patterns, it's not likely to benefit families equally across the income distribution. In the past, high-income families in the state have recovered most quickly from recessions, with low and middle-income families lagging behind. In fact, over the long term, low incomes in California have never fully caught up from the previous downturns that they've experienced during recessions. This means that we're likely to continue on the long-term trend of the growing divide between high and low incomes and the shrinking middle-income class. If you're looking at the report, which I don't know if any of you are, that's fine. I just wanted to mention, if you look in figures 1 through 3, you'll see that we're at new extremes on a long-term trend in these measures. We're really the recession bumped us up a little bit on the long-term trend, but we seem to be continuing on a long-term trend of especially income inequality. And what's behind that? There's no single factor that researchers agree upon. There's debate between which broad economic and social trends are really the driving forces. Some cite changes in tax policy, which has become decliningly progressive. Other researchers cite changes in the size and nature of government assistance programs, which have a larger share going to old age programs, not to low income or means tested ones. Other researchers cite social norms that make it acceptable to reward top executives and professionals as highly as we do. But most agree that probably the most important factors in the long-term income trends that we've experienced are global forces. It's globalization, trade, and technological change that have raised income for some workers and hollowed out opportunities for others. The single most important correlate of these long-term trends is educational attainment. We find in the report that during the Great Recession, California families headed by somebody with a college degree had much higher income on average and had the smallest declines in family income during the recession. So they were buffered somewhat from the effects of the recession. And this is because education is linked to labor market opportunities, both in the short run and in the long run. For example, while technology has allowed automation to replace some middle and lower income jobs, it has drastically grown the demand for high-skilled workers and increased their wage at the same time. Going forward, it's unclear what policy can or would want to do to address the disparity caused by these fundamental changes, given that many of them are good for economic growth overall in the sense that they have grown the size of the economic pie. We can debate how that pie may be divided. For some, the extreme measures of income inequality and shrinking middle class raise red flags about how the economic pie is divided. For others, it doesn't. But regardless of your viewpoint, most agree that ensuring economic opportunity and income mobility are important societal goals. And one way we know how to do that is through education. In the short run, this may mean retraining workers whose jobs simply are not coming back. In the long run, this might mean increasing access to education and incentives for educational attainment across the life course and across the income spectrum. And from conservative to liberal, this can be a common goal, promoting education, just because it not only benefits individuals and families in terms of improving their economic well-being through their income, but also and also addressing the extremes that we're at now in terms of the distribution of income. But it can also create that skilled workforce that California needs in order to be competitive in the global marketplace and in order to return to the strong pattern of economic growth that we saw before the Great Recession hit. That was my quick summary, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Sarah, for a wonderful overview. Obviously, there are some very complicated, very pressing issues. I'd also like to not only thank Sarah, but thank all of the people who asked some very great questions, and I think we'll set the stage for some of the rest of today's presentations and opportunities for audience interaction. So this concludes the luncheon program. I'd like to ask everyone if they could proceed to the call the forum.